Good afternoon, and welcome to the Forum Club of the Palm Beaches. I'm Harvey Oyer, your Forum Club Board President. We are honored to have as our speaker today Washington Post Pulitzer Prize-winning columnist and MSNBC political analyst Eugene Robinson. It is notable how timely his appearance with us is, 6 days removed from one of the most important presidential elections in our nation's history. Welcome, Mr. Robinson. We look forward to hearing your thoughts and insights. As you know, during this period in which COVID prevents us from meeting in person, we are broadcasting our programs from various places of interest in our community. Today, we are delighted to bring you our program from the Spady Cultural Heritage Museum in Delray Beach. The Spady Museum is the only Black History museum and cultural center of its kind in Palm Beach County, dedicated to discovering, collecting, and sharing the African-American history and heritage of our county. It is located in the former home of the late Solomon D. Spady, a prominent African-American educator and community leader in Delray Beach in the first half of the 20th century. Mr. Spady came to our community in 1922 upon the recommendation of legendary scientist George Washington Carver, to become principal of what was then known as Delray County Training School. It was later renamed Carver High School in honor of Spady's mentor, George Washington Carver. Carver High School served the Black community in southern Palm Beach County. After integration in 1970, Carver High School was combined with the all-white Seacrest High School to create Atlantic High School, my alma mater. The original Carver High School building was converted into an elementary school and appropriately renamed Spady Elementary in honor of its longtime principal, Solomon D. Spady. This afternoon, we are broadcasting from Mr. Spady's personal home, which opened its doors as a museum in 2001. This museum was the vision and mission of an incredible lady named Vera Farrington, who is a longtime and very dear friend of mine. We are grateful to her, the board, staff, and executive director Charlene Farrington for granting us access to this historic location for today's event. Thank you. Now, I invite Rabbi Howard Shapiro to come forward and give the invocation and lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Rabbi Shapiro.
Thank you, Harvey. Thank you very much. Our God and God of our ancestors, the God of believers, agnostics, and atheists, the God of Christians, Muslims, Buddhists, and Jews, the God we invoke when we say one nation under God, the God who inspired 18th century foundry workers and legislators of Pennsylvania to make a bell with the inscription, "Proclaim liberty throughout the land," the God who teaches us that to everything there is a season and a time for every experience under the heavens, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to build and a time to reap, a time to sow and a time to heal. We pray, O God, to be whole once again. We pray for healing. It has been a difficult season. We have lived with a pandemic that brings us tragedy and loss. We pray for wisdom to bear the burden that we have been given. We pray for the scientists, and we pray for all those who work to cure our pain. And we pray once again for healing. It has been a difficult season. We have lived with a political process that has sown anger and division. We have lived with bitterness and a tear in the fabric of our society. May this be the beginning of a new time. May we find hope once again. May we find a common ground to bring our nation together. And once again, we pray for healing. The shortest prayer in the Bible is uttered by Moses when he prays for his sister Miriam, who had hurt and wounded him with their words. In Hebrew, that prayer sounds like this: El na rafana la. So for our country, for our leaders, for each of us, I say with Moses, Elna, O God, heal us now. Amen. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Rabbi Shapiro. Now for a few housekeeping items. Should you wish to post about today's event on social media, please use the hashtags and handles found on your screen. We're also accepting questions for the Q&A portion of today's event. So if you have something you would like to ask, please type it in the Q&A section located at the bottom of your window. You can submit questions throughout the program using this feature, and we will try to get through as many questions as possible. Many of you purchased copies of Mr. Robinson's book, Disintegration, The Splintering of Black America, when you reserved your tickets for this event online. For those of you who did not, you can still take advantage of the Palm Beach Bookstore's special pricing for Forum Club members by reserving your copy of the book through our website. Books may be picked up curbside at the bookstore following today's program. Thank you to the Palm Beach Bookstore for partnering with the Forum Club on this event. We have some exciting programs in store for the remainder of the season. Later this week, you'll find information posted on our website about our upcoming event with the President of the Council on Foreign Relations, Richard Haas, on January 22nd. Tickets for this event will go on sale soon. Please stay tuned for more event announcements in the next newsletter. We would now like to take a moment to introduce those Forum Club members in the audience who are elected officials. The elected officials are Port of Palm Beach Commissioner Joseph Anderson, Florida State Senator Lori Berman, Northern Palm Beach County Improvement District Board Member Mark Cohn, Juneau Beach Town Councilman Stuart Katz, City of Palm Beach Gardens Vice Mayor Rochelle Litt, and Riviera Beach Councilwoman Kashamba Miller Anderson. Thank you all for your public service. Next, we'd like to thank our President's Gold Circle sponsors. Sarah Alsofrom with GL Homes, Don Kizaleski with Florida Power and Light, Barbara Suffless Noble with the J.M. Rubin Foundation, Michelle McGovern with Baptist Health South Florida, and Caroline Villanueva with Florida Crystals. Their generous support has enabled us to host these virtual lunches, and we are incredibly thankful for their continued involvement and dedication to the Forum Club. Finally, we would like to recognize member Harry Rhodes and the Washington Speakers Bureau for connecting us with Mr. Robinson. Harry, as always, thank you for advocating on behalf of the Forum Club. We are incredibly grateful to have you as our member. It is now my distinct honor to introduce today's speaker. Eugene Robinson uses his twice-weekly column in the Washington Post to pick American society apart and then put it back together again in unexpected and new ways. His remarkable storytelling ability has won him wide acclaim, most notably as the winner of the 2009 Pulitzer Prize for his commentary on the 2008 presidential race that resulted in the election of America's first African-American president, Barack Obama. Long before the states were split into red and blue, Mr. Robinson saw that politics and culture are always intertwined. Born and raised in Orangeburg, South Carolina, he remembers the culminating years of the Civil Rights Movement. The Orangeburg Massacre, a 1968 incident in which police fired on students protesting a segregated bowling alley and killed 3 unarmed young men, took place within sight of his house, just a few hundred yards away. Mr. Robinson was educated at Orangeburg High School, where he was one of a handful of Black students on the previously all-white campus. He was also educated at the University of Michigan, where during his senior year, he was the first Black student to be named co-editor-in-chief of the award-winning student newspaper, the Michigan Daily. Mr. Robinson began his journalism career at the San Francisco Chronicle. He joined the Washington Post in 1980 as City Hall reporter, covering the first term of Washington's larger-than-life mayor, Marion Barry. For the first time since Orangeburg, race became a dominant issue in Robinson's life. A City Hall reporter, he was the de facto emissary of a powerful white institution, the Washington Post, to an ambitious, race-conscious, Black-run government of a majority Black-run city. In his 3 decades at the Washington Post, Robinson also served as city editor, foreign correspondent in both Buenos Aires and London, foreign editor, as well as an assistant managing editor in charge of the paper's award-winning style section, where he learned that hip hop and American Idol are as relevant to people's lives as the quote, serious news that gets reported on the front page. His appointment as associate editor and columnist took place in January 2005. In 2010, Robinson was elected to the Pulitzer Prize board. He is a member of the National Association of Black Journalists and was inducted into its Hall of Fame. In April 2017, he was elected to a 1-year term as chairman of the Pulitzer Prize board. He also serves as a regular commentator to MSNBC. So, without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, Eugene Robinson. Welcome, sir.
Thank you so much, Harvey. Thank you for that overly generous introduction. Thank you, Rabbi, for the most appropriate and timely prayer I could imagine. And thanks so much to the Forum Club for inviting me today. I'm so happy that my good friend Harry Rhodes made this connection. And it's actually wonderful just to be able to number one, sit still for an hour and to try to process all that's happening and all that's going on, and so maybe together we can try to make some sense of it. So I guess the place to start is the election, and the question is like, what just happened? You know, I think the starting point is that we just had a close election. Now it wasn't all that close. It wasn't like year 2000 Bush versus Gore, you know, 500 and some votes in Florida close. Wasn't that close, but it was very close in the popular vote, which, as you all know, doesn't count. In 2016, Hillary Clinton beat Donald Trump by a little bit less than 3 million votes. This year, when all the counting is done, it looks like Joe Biden will beat Donald Trump in the popular vote by a bit more than 4 million votes. But that's in the context of considerably bigger turnout. We actually had record turnout this year, about so far 145 million or so voters. That's 10 million more than in 2016, and it's really an amazing turnout. It makes me wonder whether it's the necessities of the coronavirus era, the necessity of having to rely so heavily on vote by mail, and the fact that it boosted turnout like this. I wonder if that's not going to become a more permanent part of the way we do elections in this country. Hopefully we'll get a little bit better at it. Hopefully more states will be able to do what Florida was able to do, which is count those ballots before November 3rd, so we don't have this sort of long period of waiting as those votes finally get counted after the election. But I kind of think this new method it might be here to stay. So those things happened, and by the way, we elected a new president. Joe Biden won the election, and that is absolutely clear to everyone in the country, with the possible exception of President Trump and Rudy Giuliani. They seem to think that there's still a fight to be held, or a fight to be waged. But the fact is that Biden's winning margins are simply much bigger than the kinds of margins that get overturned by recounts, and much bigger than the kinds of margins that are even touched by the claims and the lawsuits that the president either has filed or is threatening to file. It looks like Biden's winning margin in Pennsylvania is going to end up north of 50,000 votes. In Wisconsin, it's about 20,000 votes. In Michigan, it's 130,000 votes. So that means actually that the Democratic blue wall in the Midwest was indeed reestablished. It looks like Biden won Nevada by about 35,000 votes. He's leading in Arizona, which is still counting, by about 18,000 votes. It's unclear which way that state is going to go, but I think Biden probably holds on. And his smallest margin is in Georgia, where he's winning by 10,000 votes. There will likely be a recount in Georgia, and there will be one if the Trump campaign decides to pay for it in Wisconsin. They haven't written that check yet. But vote margins of 10,000 votes and 20,000 votes, as I said, just don't get overturned in recounts. It just doesn't happen. Recounts generally change vote totals by a few hundred this way, a few hundred that way. At most, they change totals by a few thousand, but they don't change vote totals by tens of thousands of votes in one direction, and they certainly don't do so simultaneously in enough states for the president to overcome Joe Biden's electoral college advantage. Right now, if all counting stopped this instant, it turns out that the electoral vote tally would be exactly the same as it was in 2016, except the opposite direction. Biden would have 306 and Trump would have 232. And of course, 4 years ago, Trump had 306 and Hillary Clinton had 232. Different combinations of states, but that's how it ended up. It gives you a sense of how divided the country is right now. We had maybe 75 million people vote for Joe Biden and maybe 71 million people vote for Donald Trump. And so that's as pretty close to split down the middle as you could imagine. We learned some things in this election. One big thing I think we may have learned is that a truism of US politics may not really be true. It has always been said, and I always learned even as a young reporter and thought I knew through the years, that whenever turnout was higher, that was better for the Democratic Party. The more people who voted, the bigger the turnout, the better it is for Democrats. And that's kind of part of the fundamental strategy that the two parties have had over really most of my adult life. The idea has been that if you widen the franchise and get more people involved and get more people to participate, that has always been better for the Democratic Party. And in fact, former President Barack Obama once told me that he saw that as the fundamental fault line in American politics, participation. And so that's key to the core thinking of the Democratic Party. But in this election, we had the biggest turnout ever, and that was bad for President Trump, clearly. But it was pretty good for Republicans down the ticket. I mean, Republican Senate candidates did better than a lot of people expected. It was the sort of betting was that Democrats would clearly take control of the Senate. They did not. The two states that are going to, two seats, excuse me, that are going to a runoff in Georgia will eventually decide the control of the Senate. That won't happen until January 5th. And so if you, if you want to make a lot of money, be the owner of a local television station in Georgia over the next couple of months, because you're going to get more money in political advertising than you ever dreamed. And I can't tell you how that's going to work out. I would have told you that a few months ago that Georgia is a state with Republican DNA, but that did not prove to be the case this year. Georgia is one of the states that's really changing. And in fact, we saw how other states are changing as well. Arizona is another state that has Republican DNA that simply does not give its votes to Democrats, not in a presidential year. Yet Arizona has changed to the point where, as I said, it is likely that Joe Biden's going to hold on and win that state, and its Republican incumbent Senator Martha McSally was defeated by Mark Kelly, the Democrat. So you have this change happening in the Sun Belt. It didn't happen as some people overly optimistically, or some Democrats overly optimistically thought it might happen in even Texas, and it certainly didn't happen in Florida. But the Sun Belt is suddenly looks like a possible area for considerable growth for the Democratic Party, and it's an area that the Republican Party is going to be worried about reinforcing its prior dominance. North Carolina, I should mention, is close, but I think Trump is going to win North Carolina, and certainly its Republican senator was reelected. Another thing we learned is that my book, the book I did a few years ago, Disintegration, was about how the African American community, in many ways, has become much more diverse, economically, socially, culturally diverse, and that it shouldn't be looked at as a monolith. But in political terms, in terms of voting patterns, African Americans have been monolithic, and they were monolithic again this year. They're approximately 87% of the African American vote, according to exit polls, went to Joe Biden, and that's no other group was as sort of unified as a bloc as African Americans, and that's kind of the continuation of a long and I think time-honored strategy on the part of African Americans who are pragmatic voters, who basically at the urging of House Majority Whip Jim Clyburn got together in South Carolina to deliver the nomination to Joe Biden, a Democratic candidate that many Black voters believed could win, and who stuck together across the country and came out in very large numbers to elect Biden, especially in the cities where they didn't vote for Hillary Clinton: Milwaukee, Detroit, Philadelphia, Pittsburgh. The Black voters who did not show up 4 years ago watched Donald Trump take those states. They came out this year in large numbers and pretty enthusiastic numbers. But something else we learned is that Hispanic Americans are certainly not a monolith of any kind. And now I'm familiar enough with Florida to know that that is Florida's kind of a special case. Cuban Americans have had a longer and deeper relationship with the Republican Party, and responded, I believe, I have to look at the exit polling, but I believe responded to favorably to President Trump's words and deeds regarding Cuba. But even when you look at Hispanic voters in Texas, in Arizona, in Nevada, you don't see them voting all in the same direction in the same way, and you see a lot of Republican support, varying in different places. So this is a challenge for both our major parties. Hispanics are the biggest minority in the country, and a fast-growing minority, and it is and are up for grabs essentially for the two parties. And so both, I think, are going to have to do their best to convince Hispanic Americans of their vision for the future, and that's going to be one of the sort of most pitted contests in our politics, I think, over the next few elections. I think we also learned that we're still in the middle of a kind of extended time of political realignment, and that happens every once in a while, but major realignments don't happen that often, a couple of times a century. And my fear, this is a natural process, I think, but my fear is that it's going to hold us back as a nation. I hope I'm wrong about that, but I fear it is. We have in our heads this sort of linear scale of left to right, where we put the Democratic Party in a certain set of policies and ideas on the left, and the Republican Party in a certain set of policies and ideas on the right. And I'm speaking for myself, but that's the way I always was sort of taught to think about politics, and I just think it's not the right way to think about politics anymore. I think that's an outmoded axis. I think that's not the way people really line up right now, and I think the party that's going to have really a period of dominance and win successive presidential elections, for example, and at some point have control of the presidency and the Senate and the House. The party that gets there is going to be the party that first begins to understand where the new political axis is and how people really are thinking politically now. And frankly, I just don't think anybody quite gets it. I think frankly that in 2016, President Trump hit on something pretty much by accident, with a hodgepodge of policies. Some of them traditionally conservative, some of them not conservative at all, and he managed to put together a winning ticket. I think the Democratic policy positions are at this point more progressive. The platform that Joe Biden ran on is more progressive than a lot of people thought could possibly win. And maybe that's a sign of how people are thinking, or maybe that's just a sign of how people think about Joe Biden, having known him for so long. But while we're going through this political turmoil and trying to figure out how we think and how we line up, I think we're, meanwhile, lots of stuff is happening that we really need our political system to be able to deal with. I mean, number one, the coronavirus. I mean, I'm very, very happy about the announcement this morning about the Pfizer vaccine proving more successful in the trial than anticipated, and 90% effective. That's wonderful news. It means all politics is local, and what that means is that I might get to see my grandchildren who live in Berkeley, and I'm hopeful that at some point in the not too distant future, it'll be possible to travel again the way we used to, and for our families to travel and to gather the way we used to. I'm hopeful on that. But to get to this point, we've really gone through a terrible trial. I mean, we've had nearly 250,000 deaths. We have new cases now hitting all-time highs. We have more cases and more deaths than any country in the world. And hospitalizations right now are climbing rapidly to a new peak. And every epidemiologist I know is deeply concerned because more hospitalizations just automatically means you're going to start seeing more deaths, maybe at a rate we haven't yet even imagined. And you have to ask yourself, how can the United States of America not have done better? How can we not agree on basic, simple public health practices? Wearing masks, social distancing, not gathering in groups indoors where we can spread this easily transmissible airborne virus. Yet that's become a political dividing line, and people die needlessly. And this isn't all on President Trump. I mean, I think this is on us. I think we need to do better. We the people need to do better. And I want to have enough time for questions and dialogue. So I'm just going to and with a kind of more hopeful story about just what I did yesterday. I live in Arlington, Virginia. I drove downtown to Washington to Black Lives Matter Plaza, which is a stretch of 16th Street across Lafayette Park from the White House, where crowds have gathered starting Saturday after Joe Biden was declared the winner of the election. And there's been kind of a street party going on. And it was still going on yesterday. I went down there, and right at the fence, and you've seen it on the television coverage. There's a big fence now at the edge of Lafayette Park where people put up signs and inviting President Trump to leave. And they're street performers, and somebody had a sound system out there and was playing sort of old soul and funk tunes. And right there in the middle of the plaza, some people were gathered and standing around because there were a couple of people dancing, and there was and the two people who were dancing were a white man who was kind of your caricature of a Trump supporter. White, middle-aged, cowboy boots, cowboy hat, Trump shirt, flying a big Trump flag, and a woman. He was dancing with a woman, a Black woman, who was wearing a Biden T-shirt and carrying a huge Biden banner, and they were just having a great time dancing together to this old song called "Ain't No Stopping Us Now," and if you're an optimistic person, and I generally, congenitally, am a pretty optimistic person, you looked at that and you said, well, gee, maybe we can get along. It's not gonna be easy, and I think we have a ways to go, but maybe there's hope for us yet. So I'm going to end there, and I'm going to thank you once again for inviting me, and I look forward to some dialogue and to answering your questions. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Robinson, we are now ready for our audience questions. So reminder to the audience, if you have something you would like to ask, now is the time to submit your questions using the Q&A feature on your screen. For our first question, you gave a perfect example of Republican and Democrat, Trump and Biden supporter, black and white, dancing together, which I hope is a forecast and prognosis for good things to come for our country. But could you talk a little bit about the Black Lives Matter movement and how white America embraced that? I think those two are tied together. And your example was emblematic of really what has occurred in our country in the last 6 months, where the white community has joined a new civil rights movement that no one could have guessed they would have.
I'm so glad you asked that question, Harvey. It has been extraordinary, and that is, I think historians will look back and see. I hope historians will look back and see that as one of the most significant things that happened this year was the embrace of the concept Black Lives Matter, the embrace of that concept by so many white Americans, and it of course goes back to this is nothing new, right? The police violence against African Americans is nothing new, and like every black parent, I had 2 sons. I worried when they were growing up about what could happen in encounters with police, and we told them, how to keep their hands still and how to, make no sudden movements and all. Just the talk that, in a way that white parents don't have to do with their kids. So it's nothing new, but the death of the killing of George Floyd. And I think because it was so brutal and so extended, 8 minutes and 46 seconds, and because it was caught on video, and you couldn't not see it, you couldn't not understand what was going on, and you couldn't not see injustice there. It suddenly something clicked, and so the demonstrations that we saw break out across the country were just qualitatively different and quantitatively, but qualitatively different from anything I'd seen before, just because it was so much more diverse, so much more widespread, and I think it's really one of the heartening things that has happened in recent American history, is that there is a new sort of acknowledgement of and the beginning of an understanding of systemic racism, how deep its roots are, and how much work we have to do to root it out, but more of a commitment to do that work. And I just think that's tremendously important.
Thank you. You mentioned that Republicans lost ground in traditionally Republican DNA states like Arizona and Georgia. Our question is, despite the cultural war, Trump received greater support from Black men, Hispanics, and Asians than prior Republican candidates. So this sort of is the counter to the point that you made. In addition, voters did not appear to embrace some of the ideas pushed by those on the progressive left. So the question is, do Democrats need to look introspectively and recalibrate in preparation for 2022 and 2024, not just the Republicans being concerned about traditional Sunbelt Republican states? And if the progressives need to do this, what do they need to do to build a winning coalition that includes some of the people that maybe they took for granted?
Again, a good question. First, I think both parties need to be introspective and need to try to figure out where people are in order to respond to their needs and wants. You know, rumors of the defection of Black men in large numbers are pretty exaggerated. I mean, the exit polls showed what, 81% of Black men, and something like 89 or 90% of Black women, or maybe it's higher than 81%. The overall Black vote went 87% for Joe Biden, and that's, you know, there have been times when it was when the Black vote for Democrats was higher during Barack Obama's elections, for example. African Americans got a higher share of the vote, but you know, if you know, I'm old enough to, I don't actually remember the 1960 election, but I was around, and I think, you know, Richard Nixon and the Republicans got at least a third, and maybe more of the Black vote. I mean, there was a time. So I think that's a bit overdone. But you know, the more important thing to me was that in terms of Black vote, was that turnout actually seems to have been pretty healthy, pretty high. So I think they did respond to the Democratic Party pretty well. That said, you know, you wouldn't have thought that Wisconsin would be close, within 20,000 votes. There was a time when you wouldn't have thought that Pennsylvania would be within 50,000 votes. And so there's still a lot that the Democratic Party needs to do to understand where those you know, non-college educated white voters are, the group that defected en masse to President Trump in 2016, and I think Democrats got some of them back, but certainly not all of them. And so yes, the Democrats need to think about those voters and talk to them and figure out, you know, if there's a way to communicate and to respond to their needs.
So in Florida, our registration advantage in recent years has gone to independents, meaning more people are registering as an independent than as a Democrat or a Republican. And I think, you know, some of these elections have more to do with a Republican or Democratic candidate being able to appeal to this rise of the independents and possible decline of the traditional two-party system. Could you comment on that and tie it into the discussion that we've been having?
Well, it's true. I mean, independents are the biggest bloc in the country now, not just in Florida, and that, you know, that party affiliation, which, you know, years ago, decades ago, used to be kind of a you know, and almost an intrinsic quality, right? We are Democrats or we are Republicans, and people don't think that way anymore. And increasingly, people don't feel permanently loyal to either party, and that's, I think, reflective of this sort of realignment that's going on now. Maybe it'll stay that way, and people will continue making sort of ad hoc choices, or maybe the parties will sort of reorient themselves to have more permanent appeal to various sorts of groups and regions. I'm not sure what's going to happen there, but you're right that, you know, and if independents, whichever way independents break, is basically the way the election's going to go.
Thank you. Your book, Disintegration, speaks to the fracture of a singular Black America into 4 different groups. How can this understanding help America more authentically understand race and racism than we've understood it in the past?
Um, because really my aim was to A, try to understand what was happening to the Black community, but B, try to try to explain it within the framework of diversity, because there is a tendency to see to lump people together who shouldn't be lumped together. An example that I think of is the way we think of the way I think of policing, right? Good policing versus bad policing. And so in any city with a large African American population and a big Black neighborhood, right, there could be standing on a given street corner, over here there could be a group of young men, young Black men who were had saggy jeans on and were listening to loud music, and that group could be some really bad guys, just knuckleheads and potentially somebody the police should pay attention to, and kitty corner from them on the opposite corner could be a group of young men who looked exactly the same, and were doing exactly the same stuff and listening to the same music, and that could be the chess team on its way on its way to practice at the local high school. And the community knows the difference, right? They know that these guys over here are bad guys and these guys over here are good guys. And I think society, as a society, and bad police departments don't know the difference. Good police departments do. They take the time to know the community, and knowing the community means knowing its intricacies and its diversities, and how it's not in any social or cultural sense a monolith.
I really enjoyed your book because, like your example of trying to predict how Hispanic voters in Florida might vote, it's a much deeper issue than lumping all Hispanic people together. And I think traditionally Black America might have been lumped into the same political category. And the reality is it's a very diverse Black America. And your book does an excellent job of trying to break that into different categories that are understandable and digestible to the reader. So found that very interesting. Next question comes to us. With the election of Kamala Harris as our first Black, first South Asian, and first female vice president, can you elaborate on what this pivotal moment means for the future of human rights and civil rights in America?
Well, things happen at such a breakneck pace these days that it's hard to just like grab the time and space and quietude to be able to really reflect on like what just happened. And that's really an amazing thing. The first woman going to serve in the office that John Adams first served in, right? I mean, this is history. The first Black woman, the first woman of South Asian descent. It's incredible, and I just think about all the young girls in the country and around the world who will see her take the oath of office and who will see possibilities ahead of them that they wouldn't have seen before. And I just think that's an extraordinary thing.
What actions does President-elect Biden need to take on his first day in office to begin to unite this country?
On the first, there's a tendency to try to lump everything into day one. To unite the country, I think he has to make it clear, as he says in literally every speech, that he's going to be the president for those who voted against him as much as for those who voted for him. And so he needs to say that again, and he needs to keep saying it. On day one, I think he will be occupied with some pretty pressing matters. I mean, he's going to rejoin the Paris Accords on climate change, and he wants to provide some kind of protection for the DACA recipients who threatened with expulsion from the country. There's I think a long list of kind of executive orders like that he may issue, but in a way, it's going to be sort of the attitudinal and nonverbal communication that may, in the end, be more important. I don't think. I think that's important to let people who voted for President Trump and who might be frightened of a Democratic administration, to let them know that he's their president too.
So a corollary question to that is, do you believe that President-elect Biden can actually accomplish anything in the current political climate, especially given that the Senate likely remains within Republican control, right, and Republicans made up some ground in the House? Or does that play to his strength, which has always been bipartisanship? Right.
Well, he certainly thinks he can get stuff done now, and I think it would be kind of it feels wrong to go into a period when the country so needs our Congress and the president to be able to accomplish things together. It'd be wrong. It feels wrong to go into that period you're thinking on, no, it can't happen. It will not be easy because there are all these forces that will be sort of pulling them apart. But if you know Joe Biden, the sort of most ridiculous attack on Biden that I heard, and it was ridiculous to anybody who knows Biden during the campaign, is that he would somehow be a puppet of the far left, or he's not going to be controlled by anybody. He's wanted to be president for most of his adult life. He's been in public life at a very high level for his entire adult life. He knows where the levers of government are. He knows how to move them, how to get stuff done. And as you said, he has experience with Mitch McConnell. He has experience. I think so. I don't think it'll be easy, but I would argue that he has as good a chance of being able to actually make it work with a Republican Senate as anybody I can imagine.
The American economic and governing systems have been a model for the world because people generally have faith and trust in our system, regardless of which party is in charge. How has the Trump presidency impacted how we perceive our systems, how we perceive ourselves in relation to one another, and how we are perceived by the rest of the world?
Well, it's made all of that worse. I mean, I'm just being honest here, but I think it's one thing President Trump does brilliantly is drive wedges, and and it brought him a lot of political success. It made him president. But he drives the wedge, and he's, you're with me, or you're on the other side with those bad people who want to do bad things. And that's not the way. It's certainly not the ideal way that we deal with each other across the political divide, because we are all in this together. And the impact on our image abroad has been just stunning and shocking. And there are a few places where people are happy. Saudi Arabia, other Arab Gulf states are very happy at the U.S. Posture toward Iran, and the president of Brazil likes President Trump a lot, and the president of Turkey likes him pretty well, and but general in terms of our allies, it's been a disaster. It really has been. And the world, for 7 decades has looked to American leadership in a multilateral sort of framework to guide us on a path. And if America is not going to lead in that way, then others are having to step up. The question is whether Biden can reestablish that American leadership, that respect for the American system and for American leadership, or if he can't. And I'm not sure. I'm not sure all the toothpaste can be put back in that tube.
We have time for just a couple more questions. Do you expect mobility in the Black community will continue to trend up, and will that mobility be faster or slower than the country overall?
Well, the kind of hard to say in the middle of this huge economic disruption that we're living through because of the coronavirus, and when America gets a cold, Black America gets pneumonia, right? And you can sort of translate that to the coronavirus and something, imagine something even worse. So, Black unemployment went up faster and higher than it did for whites in the sort of coronavirus crash, and it's recovered more slowly. So this will be a lasting blow to minority communities, not just African Americans, Latinos as well, and it'll take some time to recover from this blow. Once we do recover, I hope we're able to think more about how we get more capital into the African American communities. The income gap is concerning and stubborn, but the wealth gap is just phenomenal. And the average Black family has what, 1/10 or 1/11 the wealth of the average white family, and that's how you build. That's how generations climb the ladder, and that's going to have to be addressed in some more meaningful way than it has been thus far.
And our final question, and a lot more lighthearted, could you please tell us about the artwork behind you? I understand it's a very special piece by a special person to you, and I can't help but to have admired it for the last hour.
Well, thank you so much. Yeah, a painting by my wife, Avis Collins Robinson, who is an artist and a really good painter. And this is actually, this is what you see is part of a large painting, and it actually has, it has meaning. This was done from a very old photograph of a group of workers who were building a building. This is probably in the 1920s, early 30s, at one of the two historically Black colleges in my hometown of Orangeburg, South Carolina, called Claflin University, and we had this photograph at my home in Orangeburg because one of the men in it, you can't actually see him in this photograph. He's elsewhere in the painting, but is my great uncle named Alonzo Smith, who but anyhow, that's what it's Ava. So I get to live surrounded by wonderful art. It helps helps soothe me and calm me in the middle of all this craziness that we've seen this year, and it brings a lot of joy into my life. I'm glad it spreads some joy to others as well.
Thank you. And please thank your wife as well for sharing that with all of us. And I'd like to thank you for your time. You honored us with your presence and your insights, and thank you for all that you do for our country. We enjoy reading your columns, and I enjoyed reading your book. Enjoy seeing you on Joe Scarborough's show. So thank you for all that you do and for joining with us today. I'd also like to thank, again, the S.D. Spady Cultural Heritage Museum for hosting us. We're honored to be here as well. And if I didn't remind you enough, another plug for Mr. Robinson's book, please do not forget to visit our website and reserve your copy of Disintegration. We look forward to virtually gathering with you at the Forum Club again soon. Thank you and have a wonderful day.